Last time we looked at how to draw a sphere in graphite to get that spherical look. In other words, an object that has volume and shape. And the way that's done is to show the way light plays across an object. For instance, where the light isn't hitting, it'll be very dark. Where the light is hitting very brightly, it'll be very light. But then on a spherical object, the transition from dark to light and gray is a skill that can be learned. And then, of course, this would be the core shadow, and this is the cast shadow. So we're going to look now at how we do that in color. We did it in graphite last time, but we'll see how you get that graded look when you have color involved. This is a photograph of a pomegranate with the light reverse, because that's how I photographed it. Here is a half a pomegranate, a real one. I ate the other half. But you can see how it's very, very dark here because the light source is over here. Here we have a hot spot. In other words, the light is shining directly on that and makes it light. And then there's all kinds of in-betweenness across here. So we'll look at how you do that with colored pencil. And it's good to keep in mind that this is a continued concept of planes. It's a little easier to see planes in something that's rectangular. This is a downward plane, this is an upward facing plane, and there's very little transition in terms of tone between the very dark and the very light, or the very dark and the mid-tone. One way to see those is to take a piece of paper like this and put some holes in it. You can see how much lighter this is than the very dark side. And here it's really dark, or light against the dark side. It gets a little more challenging when you're looking at a sphere because the gradation is so subtle. So this is a really helpful tool in this instance, because with this white outline, you really see, for instance, a real contrast between how light that is against how dark that is. And the midtones are often challenging because they're subtle, but they are different, and that's what really creates the turn. So the first thing to do is to identify that core shadow, the shapes of those core shadows. And artists for many, many years have used this style of drawing. Now again, this is one approach. This is not the only one, but this is a very common classical approach in defining where those core shadows are. Now this would be the cast shadow, that's off the figure. On the figure it's called the core, and to define where it is and where the edge is. And the edge will be very varied across the figure, and even across something as round as this. Now, of course, we don't look like this. We don't have a sharp drop-off. Our abdomen is rounded and our legs are rounded, but the first thing is to identify that core. So that would look something like this if we were to identify where the darkest shape of that pomegranate is. And then to go on and define, now I saw three major, of course there's a ton of little variations, but three major tones as I look across here. So I separated those and sort of defined their shapes. They're irregular. Then I put this across here and I see that I have defined these 1, 2, 3 shapes that are slightly different in tone. So putting that down, I'll leave that there. In putting that down, I began with graphite, and as we did last time, to get a circle, I found going very, very lightly in a circular motion like this helps to get a good circle. Then I go back and pick out which edge is the most accurate, and I'm doing it lightly. And for the pomegranate, get my pomegranate picture out here, I'm going to go very dark, or somewhat darker along that edge, because that's where it's resting on the table and that's where it's darkest. But the rest I want to be very light because I don't want it to mix with the colored pencil. In fact, I'm just going to take away this edge because you hardly see a definition between the edge of the pomegranate and the background. And I'll just carefully or quickly define this stem here, and don't fall into the trap of drawing a circle. It's really an ellipse because it's sideways and it slopes up a little bit. As you can see, the stem there slopes up, so I want to indicate that very simply. And then, this is one I did earlier, I put in these tone breaks, the core shadow shapes, and I'm using for color a sort of cherry red, a little bit lighter magenta, a standard orange, a yellow or more like a gold, two different purples, and a nice dark green, a bluish green. So I went in with first in the darkest area and laid down the red. And then I went over the top of that, because it's the darkest, with some purple. And I was using the edge of the pencil because I get good coverage that way. And I was using kind of a circular motion, like so. So when I got to that point, I continued with the third of these core shadows, which is this area. I'm just going to leave this alone for a while because it's so light. I can go in later and do that. And I put in the orange. And again, as I said, I was using the side of the pencil. Now there's other ways to do it. You can do it this way, but you have to go a little slower and be a little more careful. Otherwise you get broken lines that aren't going to get the kind of coverage that you really want. And after I had all three of those, well, that's actually 4 applications, the red, the purple, the red, and the orange. Then is the process of knitting, what I'll call knitting these plane breaks together and creating a continuous graduated tone. And it really is a sort of process of knitting. So I went in on the edges and just very carefully went along that edge into the purple and into the red, into the purple and into the red, along that edge. And I'm lifting the pressure as I go out, pushing as I go toward the edge, lifting as I go out, pushing, lifting, pushing, lifting, whatever I need to do to get that nice continuous edge so that it will blend all the way across. And I did the same thing between this one and this one until I had gotten all of it blended together. Then I went back in and did some of these. I applied some green in this very dark area to get it quite dark. Put in this little slope here. Then I went in and did some of the variations. They're wonderful. But those variations wouldn't make any sense until I got the real form, the look of the contoured form in there. And I especially wanted to get a lot of those variations in. Otherwise, it will look like a little cherry bomb. And then put the shading, the cast shadow, which I started with purple. And again, I used heavy pressure here, lightened as I went out. Then I went back in with some green to get that darker. Shadows are always darkest and sharpest close to the object, less defined and lighter as you go out. If we did this with black and white, it would be the same issue. If we had an image of piled up rocks, for instance, we would go in and define these core shadow shapes. And I see them this way. Then we would go back and knit that edge and that edge together. So what I would probably do is go in and darken one of the areas, because that's quite dark there. And again, adding pressure, lightening up. Adding pressure, lightening up. Get this all darker here. So adding pressure, lightening up. Pressure, lighter, pressure, lighter. And just keep doing that until I had the subtlety of that turn. We call it the turn sometimes, or the transition from dark to light. And just keep working over that until I get that turn and that transition looking like it has some roundness.